When you hear the name John F. Kennedy, what comes to mind? The White House, right? Unforgettable speeches, the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that promise to put a man on the moon. But long before he ever walked into the Oval Office, John F. Kennedy was floating in the dark, vast Pacific Ocean. His patrol boat had just been ripped in half. 2 of his men were dead. The rest were scattered, injured, in shark-infested waters. And in that terrifying moment, he had seconds to decide what kind of leader he was truly going to be. Tonight, we're going to walk step by step through that harrowing night. We'll uncover what happened, what he did, and how he saved his entire crew. This isn't just a war story, it's a leadership story. It reveals how that single event shaped the man who would one day become President of the United States. And it all begins long before the explosion. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born in 1917 into a family defined by wealth and political ambition. His father, Joseph Kennedy, had grand plans for his sons, but John wasn't expected to be the political star. That role was reserved for his older brother, Joe Jr. John was a sickly child, plagued by back problems, infections, and chronic pain. He wasn't the strongest physically, but he possessed a fierce stubbornness and a competitive drive to prove himself. When World War II erupted, Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy. He didn't want a desk job or a safe assignment. He specifically requested active duty and command of a PT boat, a small, fast, and deadly patrol torpedo boat operating in the treacherous Pacific Theater. These boats were nimble and packed a punch, but they were also incredibly vulnerable. Made mostly of wood, they were easy targets for large enemy destroyers. In 1943, at just 26 years old, Lieutenant Kennedy was given command of PT-109, and that's where our story truly begins. Life on a PT boat was a grind. The crews operated mostly at night, their missions shrouded in darkness. They patrolled the chaotic waters of the Solomon Islands, intercepting enemy ships and launching torpedoes. The environment was a constant challenge. Scattered islands, limited radar, and poor visibility. Exhaustion was a constant companion for the men on board. On the moonless night of August 1, 1943, Kennedy and his crew were part of a squadron assigned to intercept Japanese supply ships. To avoid detection, their engines were idling low. The men were tired, scanning the black horizon. Then, suddenly, out of the darkness, a shadow emerged. It was a Japanese destroyer, the Imagiri, moving at high speed, bearing down on them. There was almost no time to react. Kennedy desperately tried to turn the boat, to swerve out of the way, but it was too late. The massive destroyer sliced PT-109 in half. The impact was violent and catastrophic. 2 crew members were killed instantly. The boat erupted in a massive fireball as gasoline spread across the water's surface. Men were thrown into the ocean, some burned, some injured, all of them disoriented and in shock. Miraculously, a part of the boat's hull remained afloat, a small island of wreckage in a sea of fire and darkness. Kennedy had to act, and he had to act fast. He quickly gathered the surviving crew. 11 men were still alive. One of them, Patrick McMahon, was badly burned and unable to swim. Kennedy knew staying with the wreckage was a death sentence. The Japanese ship could return, or the remaining fuel could explode at any moment. So, he made a decision. They would swim. The nearest island was about 3 miles away. That doesn't sound like much, but this was the open ocean, at night, with injured men and the constant threat of sharks. But Kennedy didn't just order them to swim. He led the way. He grabbed the strap of McMahon's life jacket in his teeth and began towing the injured man through the water. For hours, he swam, fighting the currents, his own exhaustion, and the chronic pain from his severe back injury. But he never let go. Imagine the scene. Pitch black water, the taste of salt and fuel, no guarantee of reaching land, just the desperate hope of survival. After hours of this grueling swim, they finally reached a tiny island. It was little more than a patch of sand, with no fresh water and barely any food. But they were alive. As morning came, the stark reality of their situation set in. They were stranded, deep in enemy territory, with no radio, no signal flores, and no sign of rescue. But Kennedy didn't stop. His leadership was just beginning. He swam again, this time alone, scouting nearby islands for better shelter and a chance of being found. Each swim was a massive risk. The currents were strong, and his body was already pushed to its limits. Eventually, they relocated to a slightly larger island that had coconuts, providing them with a meager source of sustenance. It wasn't much, but it was survival. Days passed. No friendly ships, no planes, nothing. Hope was beginning to fade, but Kennedy refused to give up. Then, a stroke of luck. He encountered 2 local Solomon Islanders in a dugout canoe. This was their chance. Kennedy had no paper, no pen, nothing to write with. So he grabbed a coconut and with his knife, carved a desperate message into its husk. Noro Isle. Commander. Native knows, Poet. He can pilot. 11 alive. The islanders, risking their own lives, paddled for miles through Japanese-controlled waters to deliver that coconut to an Allied base. And finally, after 6 long days stranded behind enemy lines, rescue arrived. All 11 surviving crew members were saved. For his bravery, Kennedy was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. But the event left a permanent mark. The physical toll was immense. His back injury worsened, and he would suffer from chronic pain for the rest of his life. But something else changed, too. This ordeal transformed how people saw him. He was no longer just a wealthy politician's son. He was a leader who had been tested under the most extreme pressure. He was the commander who refused to abandon his men. Years later, when he ran for Congress and then for president, this story became a cornerstone of his identity. And that coconut? He had it encased in plastic and kept it on his desk in the Oval Office. A constant reminder of leadership, of survival, and of the profound responsibility a leader has for his people. When we think about heroism, we often picture grand speeches or battlefield victories. But real leadership is often quieter. It's holding on to someone in a dark ocean. It's swimming through pain when every muscle screams at you to stop. It's carving a message of hope onto a coconut when all seems lost. It's refusing to leave your team behind, no matter the cost. Kennedy once said, "Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other." On that dark night in 1943, in the waters of the Pacific, he learned what leadership truly meant. Before he commanded a nation, he commanded courage. And perhaps that's why, years later, millions of people believed in him. Not just because of his powerful words, but because of what he had already done. History isn't just a collection of dates and elections. It's about moments, choices, and decisions made in darkness that define who we are. Before the White House, before the fame, and before the presidency, John F. Kennedy was a 26-year-old lieutenant trying to save his crew. And he did. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the stories that shape our world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.